video about my past life in the evangelical world and its traumas. This time I want to talk about what I thought was an experience of exorcism in my youth. I want to talk about our mindset and how it changes, but then doesn't necessarily spill over into all of the other changes we might expect. Let's say one thought or idea you have, you learn to look at it differently. You're not going to be aware of how many other things you've said and done, like how many other habits of thinking and acting or speaking are connected to the idea that you just replaced. So it actually takes a lot of time to onboard new thoughts, ways of speaking, ways of acting in relationship to this transformation of some particular part of your views. And I've had the awkward experience of having changed one part of my view while continuing to speak as if I hadn't. It's like I still didn't have the language and the tools and the habits to flesh out and share my new way of thinking. And it's a messy process. You're not aware of every single way that different parts of your life are connected to this idea or that assumption. Which is why in another video, which I just made today, on the sensitive subject of politics, I wanted to remind people that we are very, very complicated. The world around us, and that we often unfortunately see ourselves through, is one that likes to just kind of cut everything down into a little teeny soundbite, a little image, and then that doesn't give you enough awareness to grow and change and to even be patient with the process of growing and changing. So, as far as deliverance goes, there was a song that I heard in my youth group. It was sung in revival services as well.
Country back to you, Lord! They need you desperately, Lord!
I'll never be the same again. Anyway, that was the main part of the song. I will never be the same again. And you'd sing it over and over and cry as you're worshiping, whatever. And then you'd be the same again. Nothing would change in your life. You just go back to your week, go back to the same habits of thinking and believing, which you were taught, even many of them were godly, but they were not helping you. So there's the frustration there. You're like, well, I'm doing and saying the right thing. My life should be working out better. How do you know? Well, my church told me. How do you know? Well, the Bible says so. How do you know? There's so much that you could be trying to do that you think is going to help you. And when it's not, it's maddening. Like you just think, well, for example, if I just speak in tongues for like half an hour, that should do something to me. It doesn't change me. Or if I just worship for an hour, if I start my day with a worship song, that's going to change me. Worship music used to be like an addiction for me. Not that I didn't listen to other music, but it was kind of like I was so used to assuming that it was good for me and felt good listening to it that I didn't realize how little impact it really had on helping me to be a better person. But I could feel smug about the fact that I was listening to it. So, what if, however, you go through an experience in the church and you experience a transformation of some kind? Maybe you do overcome an addiction. Maybe you do make a positive change in your life as a result of some message or some experience. More than likely a confluence of experiences that are happening in your life and not just in the church. But what if that comes to a head in the context of your spiritual community and you experience what religious people like to call a deliverance? I'm not here to just to dismiss the people who say they've gone through that experience, because I think that can happen in any context. I think that in any context, with or without a prayer circle, with or without somebody loudly shouting out demons, or with or without an Alcoholics Anonymous group, with or without whatever, you could come to a place where you have an epiphany, an awareness, an insight that removes some blockage in your soul, in your mind, in your psyche, in your thinking, whatever term you want to use, and helps you to grow. And if you water and nurture that transformation of thought, you can actually experience a change in your life. And that could be called deliverance. Unfortunately, we mistake all of the trappings of the deliverance experience in the church as being deliverance. They're not. Often they prevent people from making changes in their life. Often they prevent people from getting help and hope. They're just standing there while people shout at the demons and rebuke the devil out of you and pray and shunda kunda kunda. And meanwhile, nothing really changed. The guilt, the fear, the issues that keep cropping up in your life, it's the same no matter how loud people pray for you, no matter how much you believe, no matter how much you cry out to God, please save me and rescue me from this. Doesn't change. That happens to most people. We don't pay attention to that. We pay attention to the stories where a person stands up and gives their testimony and think that that testimony is genuinely an act of God that could only happen by God, and ignore the fact that there's people without your God who also have these sudden and dramatic saving transformations in their life. And plenty of people with your God who don't. Okay? Now, this might be a little bit awkward to discuss. I guess this might be somewhat uncomfortable. Trigger warning. I was molested when I was a kid one time, and I grew up in a sexually repressive environment. Those two things are not a good combination. So I had so much guilt about my sexual desires being awakened, and had some kind of what do you call it? Okay, so I didn't have language for this. People call it what is it? Bondage fantasies or whatever. I don't know. I had an individual that lived in our home for a little while we were kids, and they showed me how to do something with the Barbie dolls. It's basically a sexual bondage scene. I played this out with my sibling later. I apologized to them tearfully, and I didn't even remember this. But I had internalized so much shame about this because I felt so afraid and insecure about sex in general. And because I'd went through this experience when I was a child, didn't understand why it felt so icky. And that guilt and shame kept me so trapped for so many years. And I would go to church begging God to deliver me. Well, first of all, your sexual desires are not wrong. Even if you've got some really kinky ones, your fantasies, your longings, that doesn't mean you have to act out everything that you think you want to do. Might not be a good idea. but the desire that you have is not wrong. And sometimes when we feel those desires taking us in a direction that's not healthy for us, it's a helpful warning that there's some issue to be explored in our heart and mind that maybe we're ignoring. It's not something to feel guilty about and terrified. It's something to explore. Well, I just felt guilty and terrified. So I'd go to the services at church and I'd be singing and praising and crying out to God and crying out for deliverance. And I remember a pastor's wife coming over and praying for me. And intense prayers. And I started to shake, fall to the ground, screaming. This has happened to me in other moments in my life. In fact, it happened just recently when I was recounting a traumatic memory to someone that I know. I thought that demons were coming out of me because that was what I had been primed to think. There was no discussion of trauma or panic disorder or, just the ways your body can physically and involuntarily react to a traumatic memory. There was no discussion of that. I never heard anything about that. I don't know if the rest of the world did, but I sure didn't. So this to me was a scary sign that demons had been inside me. Well, I'd been told in the church, God and the devil can't live in the same house. This is kind of confusing, but I'm speaking in tongues. I'm supposedly filled with the Spirit of God. I don't know if the rest of the Christians are, because my church also told me that the sign that they're filled with God is that they're speaking in tongues. And wait, the Lutherans don't speak in tongues. The Catholics don't speak in tongues. Okay, I don't know. This is confusing. This is terrifying. Am I a child of God filled with His Spirit or not? What just came out of me? Fear, trauma, pain, unacknowledged experiences that needed to be discussed with somebody I could trust. That's what it was. I finally did get to have that conversation, by the way. That brought a tremendous amount of relief in my life. It helped me, actually, I think, to become less OCD, because I went through a phase where I struggled with that for a variety of reasons. I think that contributed to it, though. My prayers had become very OCD. I was just trying to repeat them over and over, asking God to forgive me over and over because I couldn't see my sin, my doubt, my shame ever going away. But it did. Because I found out there was language to describe what I went through, and I found out I'm a human being like every other human being, and it was time to change my thinking. Well, it didn't change enough very quickly, I'm sorry to say. I have been in this deconstruction process for several years now, but as I mentioned in another video, it's really in just the last year that I've seen some even more significant changes in my perspective, and even in the last month. I consider that a good thing, but I also know that that's a hard thing because my whole life has been built on a set of language, cliches, statements, perspectives, and habits that are attached to other ways of thinking that I've had for most of my life. It's not like a one and done experience, like, oh, I stopped believing this, and now I'm a totally different person. Just like if people are going to be honest in the religious world and they would think about this more seriously and take more accountability for this, it's not like you just say your sinner's prayer and boom, you're another person. Because we'll hear people say, oh yeah, they need discipleship. They might fall into the flesh. And I'm like, this is the most ludicrous and superficial way of looking at this. Like, if a person really has some serious issues in their life, it is nuts to pretend that they're just going to get it with some discipleship and some praying. I feel like that's the problem. All of these deeper needs, questions, psychological issues, and inner transformations that take actual work get superimposed with magical thinking and magical anointing oil and magical prayer and magical prophecies. Somebody's going to get mad that I said that if they get this far in the video, but it's magic thinking. I'm not saying that speaking kind words that encourage somebody, which is what some prophetic messages are in the church. I'm not saying that that's pointless or bad, But the idea that this in and of itself has the power to make you a different person is just wrong. If there is any seismic change in yourself, it's because you have experienced a change of your thoughts and nurtured that change of thoughts in your actions and speech and behavior. You might not be conscious of the fact that that's what you've done or not, but that's how that change actually happens. So, no, it wasn't an exorcism that I experienced as a youth. That was a breakdown. And I was in a completely unsafe environment due to all of the ignorance and magic thinking that was there. Nobody was going to take seriously some issues that I knew some people in my church had, because it was all about pray and babble and rebuke. Well, that didn't stop my friend from running in front of a train to end his... Didn't stop that. So powerful. She said, whatever we were doing, it wasn't as effective as we pretended that it was. And I'm not saying that it's the church's fault that somebody made a tragic decision with their life. I'm just saying whatever thing we thought we were doing that was making a difference somehow to prevent those kind of tragedies was a farce. And again, I'm not saying that people who are genuine and compassionate in the church, who do reach out to somebody and stand by them and comfort and encourage them, are not making any difference at all. Because I don't want to say that either. It's just that you're very limited in the hope and the help that you can offer them. Because religious platitudes just don't work. I had people telling me to pray and rebuke stuff at various moments of trauma and tragedy in my life. And I kept wondering, and even dared to ask occasionally, well, how do you know that something's happening here? Nobody could explain it, because it's in this alternate dimension where there is no accountability to metrics or measurement or inner work necessarily. So, there you go. Now you got to learn about my past exorcism.